Hi everyone, it's Kylie from Paynes Grey. In today's video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to paint this cactus with watercolors. Before we jump into the project, I'm going to give a little demo on how to create the washes you'll be using for this cactus. The first wash I'll be demonstrating is a wet on wet wash. I'm going to start off by applying water directly to my paper. After adding water, I'm going to dip my brush into some cadmium yellow paint, and then start dabbing it directly into the wash. And then I'm going to dip my brush into some olive green paint, and I'm going to add that on top of it. And then next we're using a darker green. I have Cascade green here. I'm just sort of poking the color in. And then you can go back and forth between using different greens. And to get the color really dark, I'm going to make sure the pigment's saturated before adding it. So here's some more Cascade green. And so this is a wet on wet wash here. And after that wash dries, we'll be using a wet on dry technique. So here I'm going to add some dots. This area was still wet. You can see the paint kind of dissipate. And let's add some more dots onto the dry paper. And then we'll also be outlining some of our cactus shapes with some saturated green paint. And then after dipping our brush into water, we'll blend out that line into a gradient. The next wash we'll be creating is a graded wash. A graded wash is when a dark value transitions into a light value. So I'm going to start off by adding a saturated amount of burnt sienna over here. And then I'm going to dip my brush into water and blend out that line. You can also go back in while it's wet and add more pigment to the left side. This will help darken the value over here. You can either keep it smooth or you can add some variation to it. You can add variation by dabbing in some more color like you did on the wet on wet wash, or you can dab in some more water. And then next we'll be using a variegated wash technique to transition two colors together. I'm going to start by adding olive green. But then next to it over here, I'm going to add some yellow paint. And then I'm going to take my brush and blend the two colors together. And then lastly, I'm going to add some Cascade green over here. And then next I'll be showing how we use these washes to create a cactus. So here's my cactus outline. And so we're going to start off by using that wet on wet technique. And next I'll be adding yellow paint directly to the water. So add yellow to the top half. Then I'm going to dab in some green paint towards the bottom. I'm just adding this olive green. And then move my paint to the edge. And then next I'm going to add some Cascade green. And then some more olive green. And now while it's drying, I'm going to work on filling in this shape as well. So I'm going to first start off by adding a light layer of water. My water is a little dirty, so it's tinted green. And then again, I'm going to add some yellow paint. And since this area is wet, the colors will bleed into each other a little. And then next, let's add some olive green. And again, some Cascade green. And then again, I'm going to continue the same technique over here. And then I'm going to allow these to dry. I'm allowing these to dry before working on the other shapes because I don't want them to blend into each other. So now I'll be using that variegated wash technique, and this time I'm adding wet paint to dry paper. I'm going to start off by using a very saturated amount of Cascade green. You can even add a little bit of gray or black paint to increase the value. And so now I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to blend that out that area, and then I'm going to add some olive green right next to it and have the colors mix into each other. I'm just going to fill that in. So now here you can see that variegated wash. So have that darker green transition to a lighter green. And so next we're going to add some dots and details onto the cactus. I lost my footage of my first cactus I painted, so you'll notice this one looks a little different. So now I'll be using a wet on dry technique to add little dots onto the cactus. Because the paper is dry, the dots will appear saturated and dark. But also have hard, crisp edges on them. So I'm just going to add those throughout the cactus. And here I'm going to add some brown paint for some dirt that's in the cactus pot. This time I'm adding wet paint to dry paper. This will help me stay in control. It will also keep my paint a little bit darker. And then next I'll be using that graded wash technique to paint out the pot. Here I'm painting a terracotta pot, so I'll be using burnt sienna. I'm going to start by adding burnt sienna to the left side of the pot. I'm adding this paint to dry paper. Just painting along the edge of the rim here. And next I'm going to dip my brush into water and then blend it out into a gradient. And again, if you need to increase the value, you can always go back in with more pigment. I don't want a super smooth graded wash, so I'm actually going to go back in using a wet on wet technique to add some more pigment. And next, let's allow that to dry. And next we'll be painting the bottom of the pot using a similar technique. I'm just using a smaller paintbrush to stay within the lines. So I'm adding more saturated paint over here. And then lastly, I'm going to add a very soft shadow. I'm just adding a little water first, and then dip my brush in some raw umber paint and add it. Add a little extra water. I also added some paint splatters. And then this step here is optional, but if you want to create some little white dots on top of your black dots, you can use a paint marker. So this here is an acrylic paint marker. You can also use opaque white ink or white gouache. And then there's the final painting. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any suggestions for future tutorials, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye now.